So it looks like we've gotten a good group already joining. I'm sure we're going to have additional people. So welcome everyone to the Nudge webinar and for spending this hour with us today. Hopefully it'll be a great session. As you know, our title here is Impartial Financial Education to Improve Employee Experience. So just to give you a sense of what to expect for the next hour, we have this agenda that you can see on your screens. My name is Ileana Garcia, and I'm part of the US team here at Nudge. So first, we're going to be hearing from Deborah Corey, who you've read about in your invitations, and she's going to share our keynote on creating this bond and how that's going to help you deal with this Great Resignation. After that, we have our co-founder, Tim Perkins, and he's going to be taking you through 6 steps on implementing impartial financial education. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes running through a couple of examples of companies who have done this effectively. And then we've got around 15 minutes or so carved out for Q&A. And we encourage everyone on the call to really take advantage of Deborah's presence on the call, Tim's presence on the call, and really just kind of ask any questions. You have a couple of different options of how to ask those questions. You can ask them through the chat, and then there's also a Q&A function where you could submit those as well. And we'll be going through those and making sure that we'll get all your questions answered. And also, just so you're aware, everyone, you will be receiving a recording. You will be also receiving a full report from us after these sessions. So take notes, but you're also going to get a recording. So I think we can go ahead and get started. So to kick things off, I'm very excited to welcome Deborah Corey to the session as our featured keynote. And as many of you know, Deborah is, her Chief Pay It Forward Officer. She's an award-winning HR leader, consultant, world-class speaker, and you'll see from her content, she's actually written 3 best-selling books, and she's been named 2 years in a row as one of the top 101 global employee engagement influencers. So you're hearing from someone who's quite an expert in this space. And I've just learned hot off the presses, she actually has her 4th book coming out. So we're very excited for her. And it's coming out next Friday. And the title on that is Appreciated! And it's going to be all around employee recognition, which is quite timely and goes very well with today's topic. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Deborah, and thank you for joining us today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I do love pictures before the pandemic because I look completely different. I think if we all have the before and after picture. So that's the before picture of me. So if you want to go to my first slide, I'm going to be focusing a bit on this whole idea of the bond before I join Tim, and then Tim and I are going to get more into the specifics when it comes to the whole financial education. And I'm going to do it 2 ways. First of all, I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about the Great Resignation and share a little bit of a perspective on that. And then I'm going to share with you 6 tips on what could we all do to create this bond. I don't know about you, but I'm all action oriented. So I want to be able to share with you some things that you can do. And then again, we'll focus a bit more specific on what can you do with financial education. So if you go to the next slide. This term, the Great Resignation, it's really an interesting term, isn't it? I wanted to dissect it a little bit in 2 ways. I wanted to first do it through numbers, because we all love numbers, and then I want to do it through words. So if you go to the next slide, this slide is all about the numbers. So I did a bit of digging as I prepared for this presentation and looked for all the numbers that sort of drew our attention to this. And the number on the left was the first number that we all probably saw. And it wasn't even a year ago. It's amazing. So it was in April 21. And it was this number that came out. I can remember seeing this hot off the press. 3.8 million workers in the US resigned. And everyone was like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Now, if you look at the total number of people in the US, and Ileana, you live in the US, I live over in the UK, so you probably know it better. But that is about 2.4%. So it's not a huge number, but it's still a big number. And actually, I did a bit of research. And if you look at the total population of people in Tunisia, Singapore, and Paraguay, that would be like losing their entire workforce, just that 3.8 million. But I think what got people to talk about it a bit more is in September, they looked at it again and the number was going up. Now, it's not significant. It went from 2.4% to 2.8%. But the fact that it was going up, people like took a step back and thought, oh my gosh, we need to do something. Now, again, I did a bit of research and you look at the difference in those two numbers, and the difference between 4.4 and 3.8 is the entire workforce of Cyprus. So that it would have lost everyone just by that. So when we all saw these numbers, this is when around the world, we started asking a similar question. And we started looking at, okay, what does it mean to us? And that last number there is from a UK survey, which basically said when they surveyed people that about half the people said that they were looking to leave their job. Now, if you're like me, I take numbers and then I really think about numbers. And if I think about my friends, my family, my colleagues, I have to say about half of the people I know are probably talking about leaving. And if you read some surveys, they're saying that people are leaving without a job. So the numbers are definitely painting that type of picture. So if you go to the next slide, I think what's really important to do, though, is take it to the next level and look, what does it mean in words? And the one on the left is the one that to me really is the most meaningful. I've seen this term used that it's called the Great Discontent. Because if you think why people are leaving, there's a few reasons why people are discontent, and I'm sure you can relate to this completely. I mean, first of all, is I'd be surprised if there weren't people discontent after what we've all been through. A lot of people are taking a step back and they're thinking, is this the right job for me? Is this the right company for me? So some of it has to do with them owning it. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, my husband told me that someone on his team is leaving. And I was like, is there anything you could do? And he said, no, because his fiance decided that she just had to move to Australia. She wanted a different lifestyle. So there's some people who are discontent that we actually just say, you know what? Have a nice life, have a next job I can't do anything about. But the people I want to focus on are those people we can do something about. You know, that person has a sad face. How can we turn that frown upside down and turn it into a smile? And think about why are they discontent and what can I do about it? Because for me, it's less about the numbers because they are going to leave. And this other term, they are going to shuffle. But I don't want to lose those good people. Okay. So we want those numbers to make sure that we're keeping the people who are truly engaged and truly making a difference in our company. So if you go to the next slide. So I said I wanted to share with you 6 tips. What I would love for you to do as I'm going through this is think about, what does this mean to you? What can you do at your company? And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And some of these are going to start at a high level, so not specific to benefits or financial education, but it'll go out and it'll go in as well. Okay, so what can we do to create this bond? Let's go to the first tip. The first one is about listening. And I'm sure you're probably thinking, I know I have to listen to my people, but I told you I'm going to challenge you. I want to challenge you to really listen and to never assume. And think about when you listen, think about the when, the what, the how, and the why. So the when, we all know once a year is not enough. We even know that twice a year, 4 times a year is not enough. Think about how quickly things are changing. Think about things are changing every week, every month. We need to be listening over and over and over again from a when perspective. The what, we need to listen using all of our senses, okay? So yes, surveys are great, absolutely great, but we also need to listen. We need to listen for all those little conversations, all of those little chats on Teams or Slack or whatever. What does it really mean? Put on your detective hat there. Also smell. I mean, don't go around and smell people, but smell what's going on. Again, read the cues. And then the why. I think there's something, I've heard it called the 5 whys or the 7 whys. Don't take an answer as the answer the first time. And the 5 whys is all about probing. Okay, you said you're not happy. Why aren't you happy? I'm not happy because I have to come into the office 1 day a week. Why does that make you not unhappy? It's because it means I can't take my kids to school. Okay, now I really know. So why don't, when you come into the office that 1 day a week, why don't you take your kids to school and then you come into the office? So really listen and really focus on thinking about the when, the how, and the why. So if you go to the next slide, please. The next one is to lead with strategy and align with values and culture. My last book that I just wrote was on values, and I have really seen the power firsthand of when values lead your strategy and when values lead your culture. And I've seen it both sides. I've seen it when it works amazing, and I've seen it where it actually gets people out the door. Because if you look at the studies, more and more people joining the organization, culture and values and strategy is important. And if they come and join you because of a certain set of values and purpose and culture, and they get there and it's not happening, they're going to go through that revolving door very, very quickly, and they are going to leave. I was just helping my 19-year-old son find an apprenticeship, and we spent so much time looking on the internet and trying to research the different companies that he was going to join, focusing on these types of things. Really, really important. So think about how you can lead in everything you do, whether that's financial education, benefits, the employee experience, everything and anything, start with that. And I was going to mention that during the pandemic, I was intrigued by how people were using their values. And I interviewed 24 companies around the world about how they were living their values in the middle of a pandemic. This is when we were on all lockdown. And they had amazing stories of how they brought their values out to play with their people and their customers and the community. If anybody wants a copy of it, it's free. Let me know and I'll share it with you. So let's go to the next one. The next one is to weave in care, compassion, and empathy. And it's interesting because if we had been speaking a year, 2 years ago, these words would not have been on my slide because I knew that people would roll their eyes. But now I think we'd all agree that we'd be very surprised if these words are not a key part of our strategy and how they really need to be woven into everything that we've done. We did an amazing job in the middle of the pandemic, really caring for our people and being compassionate and using empathy. And our employees expect us to do that. They will leave if all of a sudden we turn the care, compassion, empathy lights off. So if you go to the next slide, let me take it to the next level. I do apologize. You're going to have to empathize with me for a minute because unfortunately the timing is not good and the cleaners are walking in the door. So my dogs are joining in on the conversation here. So let's look at this idea of care and compassion and empathy when it comes to employee benefits. And I'm not sure if you've ever thought of it this way, but think about how can you weave that into your benefit programs. The first one, and this might seem obvious, is to make sure that you have ones that are meaningful and relevant. And definitely show the care. I'm sure that many of you have gone out of your way to look at your benefit programs to support people. We're going to talk about financial education. If that doesn't show that you don't care about your people, that you don't empathize with what they're going through, I don't know what does. So do that with all of your benefit programs. Make sure if they are not meaningful and relevant, you get rid of them, okay? The next one is to make sure that you have benefits that I call just-in-time benefits. If I think back to our benefit programs in the past, it was all about things that never happened. Hopefully it didn't happen. You know, you'd have life assurance or income protection when you were sick. Pension would happen, but it would long off be in the future. But if we want to show care and compassion and empathy, it needs to be in the moments that matter now and just in time where they really, really need our support. And the next one is to have ones that flex as our needs change. When I first started out with benefits, I would review benefits every 3 years. Now I review benefits every 6 months. And I've spoken to more and more companies that do that. So make sure that you flex as the needs of your people change to show them you're weaving this in. So if you go to the next slide, the dogs are finished. Thank you very much. 51% of people, almost half of the people said that they want benefits that are more aligned with their needs. I'm thinking the other 49% of people didn't understand the question because I'm sure every single one of us cares about benefits being meaningful for us. So if you go to the next slide, I thought I would take it to the financial well-being, and Tim, you'll jump into this a lot more when you hand it over to you. And this is from one of your reports. So it'd be interesting maybe later if you can add a bit more color and perspective to it. So this is a bit scary and staggering. So if you ever need a business case for why you need to do financial well-being, copy this slide and share it with your business leaders. Half of the people, 52% of people worry about money at least once a week. I'm not talking every month, every year. Once a week, they're worrying about money. 18% worry about it every single day. And 25% say that their money worries impacts their mental health. So from a productivity perspective and engagement perspective, if this part of my brain is worrying all the time and it's impacting my mental health, I am not going to be able to perform. I am not going to be at my best. So we really need to think about what can we do to care for our people and support them so that we can help them so that we don't have these types of statistics of people worrying about them over and over again. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the next one, and we've talked a little bit about this already, is this concept of diverse workforce. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time learning and getting more involved with, and making sure that I'm not basing my decisions when it comes to all of my different engagement programs, especially my benefit programs, on the needs for a few people. I know my last company, when I did a global benefits review, and I looked at who these benefits worked for in my demographics, it was most of them fit this one type of people, one type of employee, one type of person, where they were in their lifestyle, what types of challenges. And I completely changed my benefits. And I came up with all these columns and all these different benefits so that it would help everyone. Because again, people are going to leave if you're not doing it. So you need to think about what their individual needs are and then respond to them. Next slide, please. The next one is they connect together. And again, it might be obvious, but again, I've either worked at organizations or I've done consulting with organizations, and they've got these lovely individual parts, but you bring them together and there is no synergy whatsoever. So it'd be a really interesting exercise to do those last two things that I talked about. Map out, let's just do benefits, for example, map out your benefits, see who it addresses, and then see the nice picture, how they all work together. And if they don't work together, if they've clashed, and again, think about, is it the right benefit program for your workforce? And then the last one is to, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, Tim, aren't we? Is to have an always on approach to communications. My very first book I wrote was on communications, because I think that over the course of my career, I've done so many things wrong when it comes to communications. And we really need to make sure that we communicate over and over again. People are busy. They also forget. There's something called the forgetting curve, which basically says that by the end of the day, you're going to forget 50% of what Tim and I say. And by the end of the week, by the end of the hour, it's 50. By the end of the day, it's 75%. And by the end of the week, 90% of what we've said, you're going to forget. So if you don't communicate it over and over again, that percentage is going to cause you problems. So if you want people to be engaged and not walk out the door, again, think about your communication strategy, and we'll talk about that more. Okay, those are my 6 tips. I would love to hear what you do with them. And if you have any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to go into some detail.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Deborah. It's always brilliant listening to you. And yeah, I love the kind of the practicality that you bring to this. And I know you've got a lot of experience in that regard. I think one of the bits that jumped out to me just hearing you talking there was around, I think it was tip one around listening and really understanding employees. And you talked about the 5 or 7 whys. You know, it's such a simple technique. But I guess thinking beyond that, you know, big thing that we talk about in terms of understanding people is around data. And, you know, from your experience, how are employers using data to kind of layer in with that listening piece to, you know, really build a detailed understanding of what's on their people's minds and what they need?
Yeah, I think that, you know, some people obviously do it really well. I think there's some things that, and I put myself in the same category. Sometimes the problem with data is we look at it one-dimensionally and we don't look at it in lots of different ways. So if you see a number, what does it mean? So like, for example, I didn't just tell you that 3.8 million, 4.4 million people were leaving. I purposely equated it to other countries. I talked about the percentage. I tried to really look at it in lots of different dimensions so it can help us understand. And especially when it comes to financial awareness, you know, you might find that 50% of people say that they're okay and they don't really need any education. But first of all, do they really understand the question?
Yeah.
And second, what about the other 50%? You know, are they the people who are thinking about it 10 times a day type thing? So take a number and take it to the next level. But no, data is our friend. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess it's not just that point in time comparison, but it's also looking at the trends as well. it's all very well seeing X percentage of people are thinking or learning or talking about this, but what was it 3 months ago? And based on other experience and what we've seen with other clients, therefore, where do we expect it to be trending?
Absolutely.
And then the other bit that I enjoyed hearing about, because I've seen this so many times myself through my 20 years in this wonderful industry, is about that importance of connecting benefits. And I'll talk a bit more in a section about the kind of keeping things in silos. But from your perspective, your experience, what are the best ways that clients have used, the techniques they've used to connect those benefits together?
I think for me, the best way to connect is to put yourself in your employee's shoes and think about how are they going to see that, I purposely had a Lego heart for that slide. How are they going to see it all coming together? So, even like with, if I think about financial education, how do we connect the pieces of financial education back to some of the other programs? So if I have other benefit programs around pension or a holiday trading program, how does it all work together so that they can see how you're really caring for them by not having them have one program at a time individually?
Yeah. And I guess, thinking high level about this, the reason that as employers we offer employee benefits is for that reward and recognition, and ultimately motivating people and retaining them and so forth. And to what extent have you seen organizations being challenged, potentially by the finance team on the return on this investment, and ultimately, how confident are you that doing all of these great tips that you've given us can have a positive impact in terms of that retention and supporting that problem of the Great Resignation?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to data, because I can remember, you said 20 years ago, I can remember 20 years ago trying to do something around financial education or other types of what I call the just-in-time benefits. And my CFO would roll their eyes. They would just say, no, why do we need to do it? So I absolutely love this data about, if you go to a CFO and you say half of your people are going to be worrying about money every week, and you work in, manufacturing, and you say, do you want people with their minds doing the numbers while they're doing heavy machinery? Do you want to put people at risk? If you have someone who has a client-facing job, do you want someone worrying about money when they need to be in the moment supporting our people? I think that data can really help us. And it's really, for me, it's made my job so much easier in the boardroom, trying to convince people that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, fabulous. So perhaps now I'll run through, I think, the bits that I was prepped to go through, and I'm sure you've got lots of colourful examples, Deborah, that you can kind of add to this. So I think if you could flick to the next slide, please, whoever's in charge. So I think the session's obviously focused on that creation of a bond, and it's loud and clear from Deborah about how that's possible. But how do you now do that? And as an organisation and as an individual, I think we're pretty well placed to comment on that. So we've got over 300 clients who we've taken through this journey. We've done this many times before, and we've learned a lot. We've made mistakes, there's no doubt about that. But you learn from these mistakes, and we've got lots of success to evidence as well. I think before getting into our tips, though, in terms of what we've learned, I think it's worth giving some context to this and the backdrop to introducing these types of global financial wellbeing programs. Now, undoubtedly, the wellness agenda was accelerated by COVID. What we saw going into February, March 2020 was that clients were typically focused on physical wellness. That was naturally the association that people made when you talked about wellness. But as soon as kind of isolation and the worry and stress and bereavement, all those horrible things that kind of came to play, quite rightly, there was a very, very quick pivot to mental wellness. But what we're seeing is now, as we edge out of the health part of the pandemic, the aftermath, the shrapnel, is all financial well-being. You look at the world today, 2022, we're seeing rampant inflation, huge risks in assets. So I depressingly checked this afternoon before coming into this session, the FTSE, so the largest 100 publicly traded companies in the UK, is down by 4% year to date. In the US, the equivalent index even worse, 13%. Governments have parachuted over 15 trillion into the world economy. So it's creating lots of uncertainty and risk and focus on things like crypto. And in order to fight inflation, governments are increasing interest rates. And all of this is just adding pressure on people's personal finances. So if you're one of those organizations who are thinking, right, we're a bit light now in terms of financial wellness, particularly globally, 2022 is actually a really great year for you to fix it. There's never been more of a need there, and hopefully I can now give you some practical tips from our experience of how you can make that real. Deborah, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I guess what I was going to say is, and I can remember talking to you when you were new in the market, and I absolutely love now that companies are now looking at all aspects of well-being. I sort of think of it as like, a three-legged stool. So, if all you have is physical, your stool's going to fall over. If you only have mental, it's going to fall over. If, you need the financial, you need all three of them together. And I think you're right. The time is right because different people are dealing with different things. Some people, now that we've moved on in the world, now that, they've gotten the physical sorted out, and now they've got the challenges with financial. So yeah, I'm a three-legged stool person.
Yeah. And I guess that comes back to that discussion point that we had a minute ago about connecting these things. You need to have that common thread, don't you, that joins all these things together, rather than isolated employee benefits. Cool. So if the controller could skip to the next slide. So I'm going to take you through 6 tips, and I think the first place to start is to think about really understanding the challenge that your organization has and your objectives. And as an organization, when we're consulting with our clients on this, the way that we tend to think about it is in 2 parts. You've got the organization's objectives and then the people and their needs. So if we look at the organization objectives for a moment, it's interesting how very, very different objectives organizations have. For some, the driver is around retirement. From some, it might be about helping people, understand their equity plans. For others, it might be around a very public commitment they've made to social responsibility or diversity and equity and inclusion. For others, it might be they've got those 2 legs of the stool and then need that third financial leg. And so the great opportunity here is that financial wellness support can be pointed at different strategic objectives. And I think once you've understood those challenges and those objectives, it makes it much easier to measure it. So I asked you briefly earlier, Deborah, about that kind of measurement piece, measuring the impact. I think more and more we're seeing from clients just measuring. The default way to do this is how many people are engaging with it. And whilst that's useful, it only tells you so much. And more our clients now want to know, well, actually, it's great that people are using it, but what is the impact? How is people's relationship with money changing? How is their engagement with the share plan, or their feedback through best places to work surveys? What's the actual impact of these types of things? I think then the other element, that people element. The majority of work that we're doing now is global, and we're getting some fascinating experience. So it's not just the geographical and the demographics, so age and earnings, etc. When you look at different countries and regions, people have very different aspirations, and there's also very different cultural norms. So, for example, for anybody who's worked in Japan or with Japanese, it's quite rude to speak about your finances there. Whereas in the US, people are much more open, speaking about their earnings and perhaps their financial aspirations or the size of their mortgage. Somewhere like Spain, the whole concept of credit scoring is completely different. And then you've got the UAE, where actually, debt can be a criminal matter. So it gets really interesting when you start to look at these programs on a global scale. And we have got loads to help you with that. So on our website, you'll be able to access our latest research, where we got the opinions of 15,000 people from around the world. There's lots of data there to back up the behaviors and the aspirations of people and the role that they believe their employer has in supporting them with these things. And what we're also, the other piece that will be useful, I think, and just reach out to us and let us know if you'd like to see a copy of this, is our global nudgeonomics. So we're providing these programs. What we'll then do is play back to our clients, typically quarterly, what we call nudgeonomics. And so this is all aggregated and confidential, so we can't see what individuals are looking at that. But at an aggregated level, we can say, what's hot in particular regions, particular age groups, particular genders or salary bands. And so that's a really useful tool. So you can understand those challenges, combine that with the listening, and therefore make sure that you put an informed program in place. Anything that you'd add to that, Deborah, at all?
Yeah, I mean, I love nudgeonomics because, what you said before is I sound like a broken record anytime I go and work with people, because you always have to start with the why. Why are you doing it? So how can you measure something if you don't know why you do it? But sometimes when it comes to financial well-being, my employees don't always know what they don't know. They don't know what their problems are. So sometimes having that data and, these are some of the trends, all of a sudden it can help my employees get a better understanding of actually what their challenges are. So that definitely, but also I would think is sometimes we need to be a step ahead of them and think about, okay, 25% of people are saying that this is their problem now. Where are they going to be in a year? And look at the trends and such to help us not just shape the now, but shape the future. And I've learned that the hard way, like, not doing retirement clinics until, people were like 5 years from retirement. It's like, man, why didn't I do that 5 years before that? So that's why I learned you always have to be one step ahead. Yeah,
no, absolutely. We've just had a question pop in. I'm sorry if I'm breaking the agenda here by dealing with it now, but somebody's asked, we're talking about global, but can the program also be adapted to SMEs? Absolutely. I think in some respects, this kind of more industrialized approach and data-led approach is important for SMEs because, perhaps with the organization, smaller people might be less honest and forthcoming, with the challenges they're facing. So, everything that we talk about, we've got a big global audience on this call, but, this can all be applied to single location SMEs as well. So if we could skip to the next slide, please. So, I guess, by virtue of you joining this session, you're probably going to be pretty well invested in terms of employee benefits already. You're going to have a range of benefits, and actually, when you think about it, a lot of them can already fit into a financial wellness strategy. So whether that's retirement plans or insurances or stock plans or things like EAPs where they provide counselling support. What we're seeing from our clients is a belief that best practice is about having financial education as an underpin. So what that does is it helps inform people about why these things are important, apply the situation to themselves, and then they can see they've got on a plate the employee benefits from you to actually fulfill some of the objectives that they've got. And then using that nudgeonomics, which we've talked about, you can then use that to really understand specific groups of people to communicate the benefits in a very specific way and identify gaps in different regions as well. So Deborah talked earlier about the three-legged stool and the different elements. A lot of clients, the language they use is pillars. Tend to think of these kind of three pillars. But we tend to challenge that thought or certainly that description at Nudge. I think what's probably more appropriate is this concept of a wellness Venn diagram. These areas don't sit in isolation. So stress, for example, you showed a slide earlier on, Deborah, saying 25% of people are saying that financial worries are affecting their mental wellness. Aside from biological conditions, money is the biggest impact on people's poor mental well-being. So you can't solve one without the other. But then thinking practically about it, if you have got a financial education program where people are learning about debt, that is a very natural point to then link to an EAP, for example. So money touches every part of our lives, and financial well-being can kind of help bring these things together. Were you going to add anything there, Deborah?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd add about the there is no one size fits all, and I talked before about culture and values, and I think that it's really important when you design your program that you listen to your people and you design it around their unique needs. But I'm sure you've seen this, Tim, and then really challenge yourself to do it in your own way. Because if you just carbon copy and do it, it's good to get best practice. So like in all of my books, half of my books are stories of what people have done. And I always say, don't copy them. I said, be inspired, but then do them your own way. So I'm sure you've got, some great examples. I think, Eliana, you're going to do them later on how you do it in your own cultural and unique way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to how broad those objectives are. If you've got different objectives, then the solution is going to be different. So looking forward to hearing from Eliana on that. So if we could jump on to number 3, I'm just going to speak a bit quicker, actually, looking at the time. So in terms of choosing your partners, perhaps an interesting way to think about this is for me to pose some questions for you. I think the first one is, who do you want to pay for this program? Ultimately, there's 2 options here. It's either you as the employer funding this, typically through some kind of license-based arrangement, or the alternative is the employees pay for that. And that might be through some kind of asset management service, or the financial education is designed to sell products. So you need to think philosophically, who do you want to pay? Is this important enough for you as an employer that you want to fund this, or do you want to facilitate a program that's funded by employees taking up products off the back of it? I think second question would be around what level of engagement do you want from this? Is this something that you want to point at a very specific group of people, in which case typically a kind of face-to-face, in-person type program is often where organizations go? Or is it actually something where you want to provide much more inclusive, broad support, in which case technology tends to be a more effective way to reach broader people? The third question is then, what are your expectations in terms of personalization? We've got some organizations who are happy with generic pages and they just want to kind of start the journey, where we've got other organizations where they want it to be highly relevant per individual, per country, per demographic and salary band and age and family status and what have you. And then I think the fourth element is, fourth question is around, how do you want to manage this globally? Do you want a consistent experience for everybody globally, or do you want to pick out individual providers for each country? So, there's some of the questions that I'd encourage people to think about in terms of choosing partners. From your very relevant experience, Deborah, is there anything that you'd add to that when you're thinking about providers? What process do you go through?
I think for me, I want someone who's going to be an extension of me, because, we only have so many resources in human resources, and someone who knows more than me, which you definitely know more than me, Tim, when it comes to financial well-being. So someone who can make you look good. At the end of the day, we all want to support our people and we all need to work together to get there.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Number 4, so rallying your stakeholders. So I think, one of the very few silver linings of COVID has been the emergence of wellness as a serious subject for the C-suite. And we've got a number of clients where CEO is talking about wellness as their kind of pet project. Not always the case, because sometimes their circumstances are very different, but, there's some definite examples that we've seen. And so I think, that gives you a great opportunity to get this buy-in. If you've chosen to take in that approach where you're paying for it rather than the employees, it helps with the business case for that investment. But I think what I would suggest is, there are so many different ways that you can try and prove the impact or the business case for these programs. From my experience, keep it focused. Yeah, you don't need to have 8 different benefits that can come from this. Work out what is the most important, and what's the specific problem that's going to resonate most with that senior stakeholder, and pin it to that. But a lot of our clients recently, we've seen the business case succeeding, having been attached to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for anybody that hasn't really kind of made that association about how D&I sits with financial well-being, there is actually a very strong case there. So one of these webinars that we ran last year, we had an excellent speaker talking, who was saying that those people with disabilities, as a result of COVID, are 7 times more likely to be using food banks. We've seen that women in particular have been hammered financially by COVID, with the gender pay gap, retirement gap, advice gap, debt gap, ethnic minorities. So again, we had an excellent speaker, Wade Davies, speaking last year, who was talking about, in the US, people from a Latino background, 70% more likely to struggle as a result of COVID versus 30% of white people. So we can see that money makes the world go round. But if you can kind of, it affects everybody. But if you can implement and attach this to diversity and inclusion, you can really make sense for those stakeholders. And I think linked to that, think about how you can attach this to the communities. So you might have a women's community or families community or LGBTQ plus group. Getting these attached to those communities can really help the business case. Deborah?
I was just going to add that I won't tell you which company, but a couple companies ago, I had a situation where my CEO and CFO just didn't get it. And it was because they couldn't relate to it. And I think that that is going to happen sometimes. They might not have any financial problems because they have somebody who, they might have a financial advisor and something else. So what I did in this situation is I said, okay, can I just bring a group of people together? And I grabbed like 30 people from the floor and we all went in a conference room. And I said, can you just explain a little bit about some of the challenges that you're having and what support you need from a financial well-being? So I think if you have that happen to you, don't give up and try to think creatively, because it's not necessarily their fault that they can't see it from their perspective. It's our job to be able to help them do that.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's such a good idea. Excellent. So if we drop onto the next one. So few bits of advice here. So thinking about this communications and really hammering this home and making this stick with people. I think firstly, think about that stakeholder. Who do people listen to? Is it the HR director? Is it the CEO? And once you've identified that, who they're going to listen to, who is it that people always read their emails? Identifying a champion like that really does have a big impact in terms of success. I think also what we've seen is those schemes that are really effective have a hook, something to hang on. Financial wellness can be a bit nebulous with no context, but if you can link it to a pay review or your stock grants or annual enrollment or bonus time, suddenly it has context and it has relevance, and that has a big impact in terms of engagement. And we also talk about the 3 whys as well. So if you're clear why you're doing this, why now, and why you've taken the approach that you have, if you can get on the front foot with that stuff, then you'll start to satisfy curious employees, and it makes the escalation of the program a bit more natural. Be very conscious and careful though around and sensitive, I guess, to cultural differences. So for example, inflation is rampant right now in Latin America, but not in necessarily all of Asia. So you need to make sure you get that message right in different locations. And then if we click onto the sixth one, the last one, so this is very much an ongoing program, and it was fascinating to hear Deborah talking how when she started her career, it was reviewing benefits every 3 years, and then it's every 3 months. Things are changing so quickly now, and so what we've seen with the best programs are those who are using that management information, that nudgeonomics, to tweak the program, understand the impact, work out where you're not doing well. So we've got an example of a client in Australia where we could see a big spike in interest about debt. And so what that did is it informed them when we started to benchmark that, and we could see that they were a bit of an outlier. It meant that we could then start to use the EAP in a much more targeted fashion for that group of people. Or it might be that you can see lots of people learning about home ownership, and that gives you the business case that you need to introduce access to a mortgage advisor. And I think, we have a very natural cycle in reward in terms of, January to March are pay rises, April to June are stock grants, whatever it is. And so you can be quite organized and proactive about the communication of these programs. I want to leave enough time for questions. So, hopefully that's given you a few practical tips for implementation. It's been a pleasure to share our experiences and hopefully help you make your programs as impactful as possible. Ileana.
Back to me. So thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Tim. That was super helpful, I think, from both of you. So we've got, I think, about 12 minutes left. So what we're going to do is we have a couple of case studies. I'll just touch on the highlights of those. After the call, you'll receive copies of these case studies. You'll also get responses to all of the questions that you've posed. And somebody will be following up with you either to arrange a meeting or also to send, we have an ebook that we can send as well. So I guess if we can go to the first one. So the first one to touch on quickly is Accenture. We actually had them on a recent session. Not sure how many of you were able to attend that. For Accenture, it was about filling in gaps in their overall wellness strategy. And really being best in class. So as many of you who are on this call, it's about having the best offerings, not just for physical and mental, but also for financial well-being. And in their annual Great Place to Work survey, some of the feedback that they've gotten back on the question around, I receive support from my organization to plan and manage my personal financial situation. Their scores had actually dipped, or they had been staying flat and they had dipped. So they realized that there was a real opportunity and a real need from their employee population to get this type of benefit. So they implemented this financial education offering and platform. And as you can see from the slide, they've had for them kind of record-breaking engagement. And they've been really able to get kind of a view into what their people care about real time. And you can kind of see the topics that they were engaging with during COVID versus, at the early stages of the pandemic, some of the things that were on their mind versus some of the things that are on their mind post-COVID. And based on information like that, they're really able to tailor the offering that they do offer to their people. And they were happy to tell us that they did kind of make a significant improvement in that area of supporting personal financial well-being. Their scores had increased already by 13% in the first 6 months. So very exciting for them and exactly what they intended. And the next example we wanted to share with you was Shutterstock, because for them, it was about kind of having this global well-being strategy. So as you can kind of see here, impartial education connecting on a global basis. And that's meaning that every employee, no matter where they're located, no matter their region, their country, their level, they're all having this similar experience and having their well-being supported. So their rewards leader, they'd already been looking into this actually before the pandemic and had kind of gotten buy-in that they were going to implement a program. And then COVID hits, and you can imagine it was compounded in kind of all of the financial anxiety and stress that their people were under. This became even more of a priority. So they were really under the gun to come up with something, a comprehensive strategy that really could support the financial wellness and well-being of all their employees. And they were able to implement across 8 regions globally. And the feedback that they've gotten throughout have just been just how fantastic the solution is. Normally, they've told us they don't really have people reaching out about benefit offerings, but they've had many, many people reach out and say this is something really great. They've had record amounts of engagement. I think it was 90% of their employees interacting, completing the financial education stories, and really engaging with the notifications that they put out there and prompting those employees to take action on personal finance. So both two great success stories. We'll send these to you so you can read about them in more detail. And those are just some of many. So what we'd like to do at this point and use the remaining 8 minutes is to open it up for a couple of questions. So the first one is for Deborah. So the question is, can you give examples of an always on communication approach that you've seen which has worked well?
Well, with technology being able to absolutely change our lives, I'm a huge fan of having some type of company internet. So, so they can always go to Nudge, they can always go to other sources of financial well-being, so that when they need it, it's always on. You know, like at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you start worrying about money, it's on and you go there. You know, it's not just between 9 to 5 every day. So I would definitely leverage technology to do that. I mean, Tim, I'm sure you've seen that with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that the way that we describe it is, it's not just allowing people to influence and personalize the financial education they receive, it's how they receive it as well. So, you know, personally, I get my nudges, I get my financial education via WhatsApp, whereas my mum, who is an avid user of Nudge, you know, prefers emails, and you know, we've got clients that use Slack and Teams and all sorts. So yeah, it's about, yeah, the delivery being personalized as well as the content itself.
I think that's really interesting. Also, even things like, some people like short videos, some people like it written, some people, yeah. So always on is like the starting point, but then you're right, going back to diversity, create content that'll work for everyone.
Yeah.
That's great suggestions. We have a question for you, Tim. So what kind of data insights can you get from Nudgenomics that inform employee benefits? And can you give some examples?
Yes, so I guess there are kind of two main categories. Number one is engagement. So, you know, we saw some amazing stats there from Shutterstock, and, you know, having again emphasized my age, I've worked in employee benefits for a long time now. There's not many employee benefits get that such high level of engagement, but because money affects us all, you know, I think that's why those stats are so strong. So there's that piece around engagement. And then I think there's also then looking at the next level of detail in terms of what people are learning about. So, you know, the example I gave in terms of the client with Australia and the debt. So we divide the world of finance into between 25 and 30 different areas of interest, depending on the region, depending on the country. And so to be able to track and trend that over time and see, you know, where particular areas of interest are evolving is quite powerful. And I guess, you know, the vision with this and where we're heading, and we've still got a long way to go, is this idea of predictive financial education. So we can see that and the inspiration for this came from when we established Nudge. I had a very young daughter at the time, and Amazon seemed to know when I needed nappies before I knew that I needed nappies. And, you know, this is what we're creating with financial education. If I've been learning about this, then 3 months later, I need to know about this. And that Nudgenomics is a visual way of us understanding that.
Tim, I never knew that the business was started because of nappies.
There we go.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that as well. And a couple of people had asked about, is the recording, just a reminder, you will receive the recording. And if you need a copy of the presentation, we can send it to you as well. So I think we have, in closing, we have one final question, and it could be for either of you. So how can financial education prompt action?
So I'm happy to pick this up. So I think by integrating it with the employee benefits is absolutely key here. Yeah. So yeah, if for example, well, here in the UK, a few years ago, the government introduced a new form of ISA, We saw a lot of clients quickly scrambling and introducing that type of saving product within their employee benefit offering. So you've got this trigger of government legislation. People who we knew were interested in saving, they're notified of that. And then immediately you've got the employee benefit to fulfill that need. So there's a kind of real example there. Deborah?
Yeah, I'm going to interpret the question in my own way. So I'm going to take it back to the Great Resignation and how can financial well-being create action to bond with the organization and not to leave. And it goes back to what I said before about the concept of just-in-time benefits. Because what I've seen with my employees is, every time they get something through financial well-being that changes their lives, and it does, if all of a sudden you didn't know about an ISA, or you didn't know about how to get a better mortgage, or you had to save, every time something like that happens, they get that warm fuzzy, they get that connection with the company, and they get engaged. It's like I got shares once in a company, and I used the money to buy, to have a stained glass window. Every single time I walked in my house, I saw that stained glass window, I thought of my company, and I didn't want to leave.
Wow.
So I do think that that's what I love about things like financial well-being, is it creates that bond that just keeps going on and on and on. Every time it helps somebody. And, I go back to meaningful. I mean, I love it. As an HR person, I want that meeting with my people. I want to be able to get those warm fuzzies with them.
Yeah. And just very quick question. I've had a question directly from somebody asking whether this can be used for customers as well as employees. In short, yes, it can. Get in contact. We've got lots of examples. We can talk with you about that.
Perfect. So on that note, love the example of making it super personal. Deborah, love the example of the window. So we are just about out of time and want to definitely thank you all for taking your time out of your day to spend with us. This is something that we're super passionate about and we all care about. So we hope that you feel the same. And again, you'll be receiving content after the session. And any other resources that you need, we have loads of resources and information for you. So enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, depending on your time zone. And thank you again for joining us.